Hi, my name is Isla Casey. Um, this is my social justice speech that I'm submitting to the Speaking Center to be reviewed for my speech on Thursday. Um, that I will be submitting virtually. So, today I'm going to be talking about gentrification in Portugal, um, and sort of what's affecting that right now. So this is a slide of some tourists in from France on a Segway tour in Alfama, which is a neighborhood in Lisbon, Portugal. Um, and the reason why I have this up is it shows this sharp contrast between these these tourists, so you can see how they are sort of wearing rich clothing. You can tell that they have money. Obviously, they have money because they can afford to go on trips, on vacations to other areas, um, and how it contrasts with their environment. So, the environment around them kind of speaks very cultural, and more of a poorer neighborhood, old brick buildings, and just the structure and design of everything. So, why is this topic important? As college educated foreigners, we should be aware of the economic status of every place that we visit. We should be aware of it so that we know and can be concerned. And I feel that it's our responsibility as college students to know about these things so that we can do what we can to help. I've done research on gentrification before, specifically in America, but this time I will be focusing on Lisbon, Portugal. So, gentrification is a growing problem in Portugal right now. It really started to become a problem in 2017, when Portugal's GDP skyrocketed, which GDP stands for gross domestic product. Its GDP was 3.5% in 2017. And I got this information from the World Bank from 2019. So after its GDP increased, more tourists started to come in. But an increase of tourists in Portugal can cause higher prices of stuff like rent and groceries. So as the tourists and foreigners fill Portugal's streets, it businesses start sort of focusing on them and raising the prices because the rich foreigners can afford this. However, the locals cannot. So in a New York Times article by Rafael Minder from 2019, he talks about Portugal's strategy for financial relief. So originally, Portugal wasn't like focused on the rich. It was a very poor neighborhood. There was a lot of like drugs and a lot of human trafficking. So why did it have this sort of dramatic change? And the main reason for this is Portugal was trying to fix their the poor neighborhoods and everything, and the crimes by trying to bring in foreign money. But the problem is it worked, and they started getting a lot of money, and their economy increased, which initially sounds like a good thing, but looking at how it affects locals, which we will in a minute, you can see that this isn't necessarily a great thing that's happening. YouTube video that I watched perfectly kind of described this. It was a DJ artist, and you could tell that she was kind of rich by the clothing that she wore and how much traveling she did. She was from England, and England's rent started going up a lot as well. And she made this video about her moving to Portugal, and she was talking about like the scenery and the new buildings that were coming up and the cheap rent. And these are all reasons that I had seen in other places of why foreigners were coming in, which is legitimate reasons to go to Portugal. However, this has caused a displacement among the locals, where when the rent goes up because of these foreigners coming in that can afford it, the locals can no longer afford it and become evicted. So, as we said, the increase in tourists affects housing prices and small businesses. In the same New York Times article, a local traditional carpet weaver was driven out of his home because he could no longer had customers coming in, and he was evicted from his apartment because he could no longer afford it. Fortunately, he started a wine business, and has started leasing out an apartment. Another example of eviction is a story from a seamstress who was driven out of her apartment. It was an older lady, and who never thought that she would be taken out of her own home, especially with how old she was, and she had to move in with her daughter. I also got this story from the same article. So it's kind of a chicken and egg situation. As when Portugal started bringing in foreign investors, they started making renovations, and then tourists started coming. And just rich individuals in general. So this, as I said earlier, has resulted in a higher cost of living, but also, like I said, a displacement in the locals. Well, when there's a displacement in the locals, there's also a loss of culture, because the locals are what make the culture. So as Portugal renovates the housing for incoming tourists, these rents starts to spike. From the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research, from 2019, titled "Intensity of Urban Rehabilitation," they sort of talk about how the change in the people have started causing these higher costs of living, in rent, in groceries, in travel, transportation, everything in general. And they talk about inner city gentrification, how it's linked with a lack of urban expansion of Portugal. So as these locals are being displaced, the culture of Portugal starts to become lost and replaced with modern hotels and coffee shops for the rich families. From the Global Post, written by Barchfield in 2018, she does an article about a 19th century mansion in Portugal that was being planned to be demolished for a glass-walled hotel, which is a very sad thought, because it's from the 19th century, so it's like 200 years old, over 200 years old, and it's a big part of the culture that represents Portugal. So in a journal titled Sustainability by Gussman from 2019, talks about big change in economic status, the effect on culture. In a quote, he says, "Portugal rapidly transformed from a devalued old area into the center of an important urban tourism destination on a European level." So it was attracting all these Europeans. The YouTube video I mentioned earlier, the DJ artist talked about a lot of people moving out of England into Portugal, and a lot of her friends were moving into Portugal. And it was starting to create more of a European style instead of, Portugal's culture. So, in conclusion, we can see how gentrification can be caused by a number of things and can really have a negative effect on a community more than you might initially think. And it's a really quite a big ethical question as to whether or not, which is better, a higher, better economic system for this country, or for it to stay poor but keep the culture. And I think it's important that we recognize this question and ask ourselves this question, because these people in Portugal are being replaced. They don't have anywhere to live now. So what may seem like a beautiful city on the outside hides the dark reality behind urbanization of old cultures. Is a better economy worth destroying landmarks? These are questions we should consider when we renovate cities and change their economy, because what might be beneficial for one is detrimental for the other. Thank you.